Yeah. So if you can just state your name and your position here at the university.
I'm Kendra Ogletree Cusaac. I am a licensed clinical and sports psychologist. I'm a senior psychology instructor with the psychology department and contract sports psychologist with the university athletic department.
Sounds so crispy.
Don't laugh at me. Edit that out.
So Dr. Cusaac, what are some of the most common ways athletes cope with the absence of playing?
Oh, they do it a number of different ways. Some will act like nothing's wrong and they'll just go through their rehab, kind of focus on that, try to get back as soon as they can. Others might find themselves a little sad, a little depressed about it, not really sure what the prognosis is. Others will take it as a challenge and really kind of dig into fighting through it, trying to get back as soon as possible. Just depends on the individual.
What factors lead to athletes coping in different ways?
I think their experience with the sport matters. If they've been injured before, what level they've been as successful at, if they were successful young versus just gaining success. I think their family involvement matters. Their involvement with their teammates. So I think all those things, social support system, whether or not they've been injured before, all those things kind of play into how well they'll cope with it.
Do you believe that some athletes have an I'm invincible mentality, that I won't get hurt or that they're free from injury?
Absolutely. I think some athletes do believe that injuries happen to other people. I think secretly they hope it just doesn't happen to them. And they've seen other people go down with injuries and they just kind of hope that's not me one day. I'll do whatever I can to try to not make that happen. I do think some people think they're invincible, so when it does happen, it's kind of really life-changing.
Do you think that has a difference in how they cope if they didn't expect to get injured and they are injured?
Yes and no. I think if they never felt like they were going to get injured, they did everything they could possibly do to try to not get injured. It's kind of a surprise. I think people that have been injured before know that it can happen. They hope it doesn't happen again. They kind of know what to expect, how to get through it. But every injury is different. It kind of depends on the nature of that injury and what's the prognosis.
So once an athlete is injured, can you kind of walk through the athlete's mental recovery, specifically in reference to the five stages of griefs?
Yes, Kubler-Ross put forth the 5 stages of grief. And some people have attached it to how an athlete may recover or even perceive their injury. So to reference those particular stages, the first one is denial. Can't believe it happened. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Don't know what's going to happen. Second stage is they get angry. Why me? Why now? It's my senior year. Oh, this was my shot. The third stage is something we call bargaining, which means they kind of, I'll be really good and train better this time. I'll eat right. I'll get sleep. I'll do all the things possible if I can get back on the field. The fourth stage is depression, which is you kind of get sad, trying to figure out, why did this happen? Am I ever going to be back to normal? And then the fifth stage would be acceptance. Current thoughts in the field right now are that athletes may not go through those 5 stages. They, especially like the bargaining stage, is kind of questionable. Some people may get the depression earlier instead of the anger, and so there's a lot of flux when you look at those stages. It just depends, again, on how well that athlete has coping mechanisms, social support, and people really believing that they can work through that injury.
Do you think athletes repeat those stages, or there's a certain order that it goes in?
I think they can go back and forth. I think some stages you can work all the way through. You might go back to some, you might stay in one, and that's where you stay. Like depression, it's very possible that some athletes may stay in depression and not really effectively get through it.
As you talk about the athletes that stay in depression, could you talk about some of your harder situations where you have athletes that contemplated taking their lives, or how do you, as a sports psychologist, deal with that?
I think when you're talking with an athlete about kind of what their experience is like with the injury, really talking to them about what that injury means, and if they see it as changing maybe their livelihood, like they were thinking they were going pro, that this really challenges their chances. If they're not sure if they're going to actually recover from this injury, sometimes depression does set in, and sometimes with depression comes something we call suicidal ideation, which means you start thinking about, well, what is this worth it? Is life worth it? Is what I'm doing, am I hopeful that I'll get through this? Or am I helpless that I can't really do anything about it? So it's possible that people kind of start going down that train of thought, particularly if they don't have a lot of support, if they're being isolated. There's lots of examples where a lot of your friends are on the team and then they're traveling. And then you are left behind with your injury. And so who's there to kind of talk with you and make sure that you're doing okay as you're going through rehab or as you're post-surgery or just trying to make it through till you can actually play again.
How do you either prevent those, is there any way to prevent those thoughts from triggering once you're in depression? Is there any way to, I guess, stop the thoughts from?
I don't think you can stop the thoughts. Sometimes they're automatic, sometimes they're kind of random, sometimes they kind of pop in your head. What we try to encourage athletes to do is to talk to people about what's going on, having the trainer, the certified athletic trainer say, how are things going, checking in with them frequently, having people check the changes for depression, are you sleeping well, are you eating well, are you looking at your energy level, what are the things that you're doing that are different, are you finding pleasure hanging out with your friends like you used to? And by checking in on those things and then not being afraid to ask the question, have you thought about harming yourself? Have you thought about it? Is it something that enters your brain from time to time?
How are you, as a sports psychologist, or what do you tell those athletes that are in similar situations to mine or in the exact same situation that aren't able to play anymore? What is the first step that you take in helping them recover or deal with their injury?
The first step really is getting them to talk about how they feel. How do they feel about it? It's almost like dealing with a loss. You got to talk about how did you find out, what did you think, how did you feel about it, even where were you when they told you, and then keep walking them through kind of how do you feel, how do you feel, how do you feel, because their thoughts about it are going to change over time. Okay, so it's the end of the season and you're okay. Okay, but now the beginning of the season's coming. Are you having some thoughts and feelings about that? What did the sport mean to you? Talking to them about what got you started. What did it do for you? How did you feel playing? And then now how do you feel when you're not playing? What's life like now without the sport? Is it part of your identity? So it can be a long process. I think a lot of athletes that have kind of a season-ending or career-ending injury, they don't really want to face it. It's very hard. And when they finally come to realize, I just am not going to be able to play anymore, now what? How's your family responded? Are you still friends with your teammates? How are you still kind of dealing with it? Sometimes people cannot even be around their sport. Sometimes they want to be involved in the sport. So you really have to kind of go with the individual's response.
I know you talked about them being away and traveling, so does that open up more room for them to cope with other things?
I think teammates underestimate their value with each other. I think you should always make sure your teammates are okay. Ask them how they're feeling. See what happens when we're gone. What do you do? Are you stuck in your room? Are you doing other things? Are you going out and drinking? What are the other coping mechanisms that is that person using? Teammates are kind of your best resource because they are the ones that might live with you. They see you in the training room. They can tell if you're different. They can tell if you're withdrawing from people or you're not talking to people or you're not laughing as much. So really, those are kind of the first place we go to kind of check on people. How's so-and-so doing about their injury? Are they making it okay? Have teammates been helping them? Are you giving them rides? Are you assisting them? Really kind of making sure that they're taking care of each other.
We've talked about the research on injured athletes, and obviously you're my mentor on it. How do you think that research will benefit the sports psychology field, or if it will in any way?
It benefits it greatly, actually. We as a sports psychologists, we work a lot with the certified athletic trainers. We work with the team physicians. We all work together on the injury rehabilitation models. We need each other, because again, to me, the athletic trainers are the people that see them every day and doing the rehab and designing the rehab programs. The team doctors can give you a different take on it in terms of prognosis and what's it going to take long term to kind of get through this. And then we handle the psychological part in terms of coping mechanisms, in terms of, well, why aren't they sleeping well? Well, they're not sleeping well anymore because they might be in pain, they're distracted, they're worried, they don't know what's going to happen next. So I think as a team, everyone is kind of paying attention to what's happening, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically with the athletes. And that's starting to grow in the field in terms of research, in terms of the application. People are paying a lot more attention to it.
I've talked with a couple of people that have been in my situation before, and obviously we've experienced the same thing of not feeling like a basketball player anymore, or not feeling like whatever your sport may be. How do you help those athletes come to find who they are, again?
I think recognizing that that was part of your identity and talking to them about that's not all you ever really were. Even if people treated you that way, you were the swimmer, you were the tennis player, you were the basketball player. I play ball, that's what I do. But you start to realize when you take that chunk out of your life that you might have other talents, you might have other skills, you might have other abilities that you didn't even know you had because your time was taken up so much with the one thing. And so really giving them opportunities, giving them skills, maybe to meet new people or go to new organizations or new activities, just trying to encourage them to kind of branch out and try new things is really helpful.
As you talked about the research and what was his ultimate goal is to create a support group, what role does, the people that can't understand play, how is that important to surround yourself by, other injured athletes?
I think being around people who have experienced what it's like to be laying on the floor or on the field injured, just that thought, then taking it to, well, what happens if you have to get surgery? What happens if you then have to go through the rehab process? So every step of the way, at some point, your teammates have been through something, especially at this level, Division I level. Most people have gone through some kind of injury that they're going to have to work through, even if it's a nagging injury or if it's a serious injury, season ending. They can give that perspective. The one thing about athletes is everybody wants to play, no matter what. They want to play. I'll play with my broken leg. They want to play, and I think that's the connecting link, is because everyone has this passion. They want to play. They're competitive. The last thing you want is an injury to stop you. And I think that's the connecting link that probably people that are non-athletes don't understand. Well, why won't they retire? Why won't they stop? Well, why are they so upset because it's career ending? Because they still want to play.
What other coping mechanisms would you suggest for athletes that are injured?
If they're in the college level, take an opportunity to be a student. Experience what it's like to be a student. And I think that's a piece that I've noticed a lot of student athletes, if they are taken out at a certain point, they're like, oh, well, I didn't realize I could go to lunch with friends. Oh, I have time on the weekends to actually do something other than, I could go to a movie. They start realizing that because their time has been so taken up by study hall, practice, weights, conditioning, film, they actually have time to branch out and do other things. And sometimes they're really surprised at what things interest them, whether it's art or photography or church. There's lots of other things that people find they can get involved in. And that, to me, in some ways makes them more well-rounded. And to me, that's what makes them a better person. So you work through something that might be hard and you might have to struggle through. And sometimes it's damaging to your relationships because people only knew you as an athlete. They don't know how to deal with you if you're not an athlete. And so you learn new skills on how to relate to people.
Do you think opening up that being a student will open you up to potential other bad coping mechanisms such as, drugs or anything that is bad? Do you think you have a higher potential of experiencing?
I think if you are injured and you're susceptible to that anyway. I think because you're not doing the things you normally do, your time is not taken up like it normally is, so you're clearly at risk for wanting to self-medicate, which could be using drugs, could be overusing your painkillers, could be drinking alcohol, and so on. You're not sleeping well. There's lots of ways that it puts you at risk for using substances to cope.
If there were other athletes out there, well, there are, but being a sports psychologist, what would you say to them now to encourage them if they were like looking in and watching now?
I would say if you experience an injury, you're not alone. Don't be afraid to talk to people. When people ask you how you're doing, they don't have to just mean, how's your injury coming along? Because I think that's kind of a thing too. They get tired of people just asking about how's your knee coming along? Is it getting better? How's rehab? Ask me. Ask me how I'm doing. Ask me about the other areas of my life, not just my sport. How's school going? How your classes coming along? How's your family? Just talk to them like they're a real person, not just the athlete with the torn ACL.
Well, that's it. Do you have anything else you would like to add or anything?
And if I say too many times, you'll edit that out?
Yeah.
You're like,